Hey everyone, in this video we're going to be determining EKG axis deviation in less than 30 seconds. Stay tuned till the end of the video for some quick examples. So this chart will make a whole lot more sense when the video is over. So I just want you to keep this in your mind, take a screenshot of it, or play back the video and watch this after you finish the video. But the three leads that you need to really be looking at to determine axis deviation the quickest are going to be 1, 2, and AVF. After you look at all of those, it should be really clear what the axis is going to be. One more thing I am going to say on this slide is that to quickly determine if it's a normal axis, because this is what requires very little brain power, and after that you don't have to memorize it. But I would memorize this just because most axes are normal. So as you're, working in the emergency department or just in the clinic and looking at EKGs, you can very quickly, in less than 5 seconds, determine if it's normal by just looking at lead 1 and lead 2. If both lead 1 and lead 2 are positive deflections in the QRS complex, then you have a normal axis. Okay, so this is the Cabrera system. I'm sure that most of you guys have seen it that have been studying cardiology, but essentially this is how this whole diagram works. So if you have a normal axis, we already talked about how it's lead 1 and 2 that are going to be positive. So the way that you use the Cabrera system, and let's just start with lead 1. If lead 1 is positive, you're going to shade in the half of the circle that is perpendicular and closest to that lead. So lead 1 is positive, it's perpendicular here, and then you color in the entire half that's closest. If it was negative, you would do the exact opposite and you would color in this half of the circle. Lead 2 is the same way. If we have a positive deflection in lead 2, then we're going to color in the half of the circle that is perpendicular to and closest to lead 2. And then when we have both of these things done, we can look and see where the overlap is, and that is where our axis lies, somewhere in that region. Now, we don't need to go any further than this because these are the borders of a normal axis. If something lies in this green area, then it is considered a normal axis. So that's why if lead 1 is positive and lead 2 is positive, then we can, with 100% certainty, say that this is a normal axis. Left axis deviation is going to be similar. We're going to have a positive deflection in lead 1, so we're going to color in that half of the circle that's closest to lead 1. However, when we then go to lead 2, it is going to be a negative deflection. So our next step is to look at lead AVF, and lead AVF is going to be a negative deflection as well. So when AVF is a negative deflection, we're going to go perpendicular to AVF and color in the half of the circle that's furthest away from lead AVF. This green area is where they overlap, and this is also the overlapping area for a left axis deviation. Now, I will note that this one little sliver right here is technically normal axis, but since we always look at lead 1 and 2 first, when we looked at lead 2, it had to have been negative, right? Because we said 1 and 2, if they're both positive, has to be a normal axis. So we looked at lead 1, it was positive. We looked at lead 2, it was negative. So if you were to have colored in lead 2 being negative, it would be this half of the circle right here, and then it would just be this little overlapping area where our axis could lie. I didn't do that, it's too busy, and again, just know that if it's a negative deflection in lead 2, just go to AVF and look from there. Okay, right axis deviation, you're going to have a negative deflection in lead 1, so you're going to color in the half circle that is opposing lead 1 and also perpendicular. You're going to look at AVF. AVF is going to be a positive deflection, so you're going to color in the half circle that is closest to AVF. Overlapping area, again, is going to be our axis deviation. This would be our right axis area. So northwest axis is very rare, and honestly, if you are having a northwest axis and the patient is fine, not in cardiac distress, you need to check your leads because you probably put them on wrong. There's very few things that can cause a northwest axis, one of which is ventricular arrhythmias, but again, if they're not in cardiac distress, either check to make sure you determine the axis correctly, and then check your leads if you did determine the axis correctly. But in order to do this, we're going to look at lead 1 first. Lead 1 is going to be negative, and then also AVF is going to be negative. So that colored in area is going to be our northwest axis. So this is just to kind of help you guys practice what you just learned. So first thing we're going to do is look at lead 1. Lead 1 is a negative deflection. So then we're going to go straight to AVF. AVF is clearly a positive deflection. So this is going to be a right axis. Now the diagnosis is going to be a right bundle branch block and with right ventricular hypertrophy. Now in order to determine right versus left bundle branch block, all you have to do is go to V1. You're going to go to V1. You're going to go to the J point, which is this area right after the QRS complex right here. And imagine that you're standing on this area looking out towards the QRS complex. If you turn right, it's a right bundle branch block. If you turn left, it's a left bundle branch block. So here we're going to be turning on this J point, and we have turned right. So this is a right bundle branch block, and along with a increased or lengthened QRS complex, this would indicate bundle branch block. Also, this M pattern is very characteristic of a bundle branch block. So with the M pattern, with the lengthened QRS complex, and with the standing at the J point, turning right, that would be a right bundle branch block. Oftentimes when we have right axis deviation, it's going to be paired with right ventricular hypertrophy along with a right bundle branch block. Anytime you have hypertrophy, aka you're enlarging the heart muscle, sometimes the electrical system can kind of get out of whack with that, so it will cause bundle branch blocks. Okay, so lead 1 is positive, lead 2 is positive. We know this is normal. That was less than 5 seconds, easy enough. Diagnosis, this is going to be left ventricular hypertrophy. You can tell this by the deep S patterns on V1 here. See how they're going off the page? And then also here. Now there is criteria for actually counting these, but it's not vital for this lecture, so I'm not going to get into it. But just know that you can have left ventricular hypertrophy with a normal axis depending on the person's anatomy. Sometimes you'll have a left axis deviation, sometimes not. A lot of times they will be technically in that normal range, but on the left side of normal. And those are just all of those tall QRS complexes. Okay, so axis, well, we have a negative in lead 1, so then we're going to go to AVF, and we have a positive, so this is going to be a right axis deviation. The diagnosis is going to be right ventricular hypertrophy with right atrial enlargement. So we see this tall P wave right here. This indicates right atrial enlargement. And then oftentimes right atrial enlargement goes along with right ventricular hypertrophy. Really, the right ventricular hypertrophy becomes the first thing that occurs, and then as you go into diastolic heart failure and blood starts backing up, it turns into right atrial enlargement. And again, right ventricular hypertrophy a lot of times goes with the right axis deviation. Okay, so we have a positive deflection in lead 1 and a positive deflection in lead 2. So this is going to be a normal axis. The diagnosis is going to be left ventricular hypertrophy and left atrial enlargement. Now you can't really see very well. The hypertrophy is pretty obvious to me. So as you're looking at the deepened S QRS complex and the deepened S wave, you can really see how they kind of start running into the other complexes. So we can kind of see that that is hypertrophy. And then this one right here, the V3, is a pretty good example of that P wave that we're going to be seeing. This is really blurry, so I don't expect you guys to really be able to see this. This one's 2. You can kind of see it in lead 2. But the left atrial enlargement is going to have like a bifid P wave. So here you can kind of see it go up, and then it stops and goes up again, and then it goes back down. That is characteristic of left atrial enlargement versus the right atrial enlargement where you just had a peaked P wave. Okay, our axis, we have a positive deflection in lead 1 and a positive deflection in lead 2, so that's going to be a normal axis. The diagnosis here, we clearly have a lengthened QRS complex. If you go to the J point, you're going to be turning right, which means right bundle branch block, and then we also have that M pattern that should cue you into it's a bundle branch block as well. We have in this one a positive complex in lead 1, and honestly lead 2, it's kind of hard to see. Some of them look equal, some of them kind of look negative, so I'm going to look at AVF next. I think that it might be slightly negative, so we're going to go to AVF down here, and that is negative. So this is going to cue us in that it is a borderline normal, probably left axis deviation. This is clearly a lengthened QRS complex here. So we're going to go to that J point in V1 and we turn left here. So that is going to cue us into a left bundle branch block. Okay, and that concludes this video. I hope it helped. If you guys have any questions, please feel free to leave a comment and don't forget to like and subscribe.